Long before the towering spires of Cinderella's castle dominated the skyline, and decades before theme parks became a global phenomenon, Walt Disney lived in a home that felt like it had been plucked straight from the pages of a fairy tale. Tucked away in the quiet, rolling hills of the Los Feliz neighborhood in Los Angeles, this residence was not a monument to vanity, nor a display of immense wealth. It was something far more personal. It was a whisker of imagination. This was Walt Disney's Storybook Mansion. To the casual observer, it was simply a beautiful house, but to history, it was the sanctuary where creativity rested after long, exhausting days at the studio. It was a structure built not just from wood, stone, and mortar, but from dreams, patience, and storytelling woven into every single corner. For Walt, this mansion was never intended to be a symbol of power. It was designed to be warm, comforting, and undeniably magical, mirroring the very stories he was beginning to share with the world. It reflected the true nature of the man himself, a dreamer who believed that magic shouldn't just be on a screen, it should feel personal, and it should feel like home. To understand the house, we must understand the era. We're transported back to the early 1930s. At this moment in time, Walt Disney was not yet the untouchable global legend we revere today. He was successful, yes, but his future was balanced on a knife edge. The medium of animation was considered risky business. The concept of a full-length animated film feature was unheard of. Many critics believed cartoons were only good for a few minutes of laughter, incapable of carrying a serious emotional narrative. Simultaneously, the world outside was crumbling. The Great Depression had tightened its grip on America. Jobs were scarce, money was tight, and anxiety hung in the air like a fog. Even the successful lived cautiously, never knowing if their fortunes would vanish overnight. Yet, in the face of this paralyzing uncertainty, Walt Disney chose to dream bigger. He purchased a plot of land in Los Feliz near Griffith Park. The location was strategic. It offered fresh air, sweeping views of the city below, and most importantly, distance from the noise and chaotic energy of Hollywood. He wanted a sanctuary where his daughters could grow up surrounded by nature and where his own mind could decompress. Once the land was secured, Walt's vision for the architecture was crystal clear. He rejected the idea of a cold, imposing palace meant to intimidate guests. He wanted a home that felt alive. To achieve this, he collaborated with the renowned architect Frank Crowhurst. Crowhurst was a master of blending historic European aesthetics with modern American comfort, and together they created a masterpiece of the storybook architecture style. Popular in the 20s and 30s, this style borrowed heavily from medieval cottages, French provincial estates, and old-world European villages. The resulting home was a visual delight. It rejected straight lines and sharp, aggressive edges. Instead, the house featured soft, rolling curves, steeply sloping roofs, decorative chimneys, and whimsical turrets. It looked playful, as if it had grown organically from the hillside rather than being constructed upon it. It is a fascinating irony that this house was built during the Depression. Because employment was so scarce, highly skilled artisans, woodworkers, glass artists, stonemasons were eager for work. Walt employed these master craftsmen, and as a result, the mansion was built with a level of detail and quality that is almost impossible to find in modern construction. It was completed in 1932, costing roughly $50,000, a small fortune then, equivalent to about $1 million today, but a bargain considering the sheer artistry involved. Stepping inside the mansion was less like entering a house and more like stepping into a scene from a movie. The interior was a rebellion against the cold marble halls typical of Hollywood's elite. It welcomed visitors with warmth, color, and texture. The journey began in the grand foyer. The centerpiece was, and still is, a magnificent circular staircase. Unlike a standard straight flight of stairs, this helix structure flowed gently upward. It was graceful and theatrical without being dramatic. For Walt, who made his living studying movement, this staircase symbolized progress and imagination. Sunlight filtered into the home through intricate stained glass windows. These weren't just windows, they were light paintings. They transformed the harsh California sun into soft pools of gold, amber, and blue that shifted across the floor as the day progressed. The woodwork defined the character of the home. Every beam, panel, and archway was carved by hand. The ceilings were a spectacle in themselves. In the living room, soaring vaulted ceilings with exposed beams gave the space a sense of grandeur, yet the room remained cozy thanks to a massive stone fireplace. This fireplace was the heart of the home, where Walt would often sit in silence, sketching ideas or simply staring into the flames, while his wife Lillian created a sense of balance and calm around him. The private realm, family, and routine. While the public spaces were stunning, the true soul of the house lay in the private quarters upstairs. This was the world of the Disney family, strictly separated from the public eye. The master bedroom, shared by Walt and Lillian, was a study of tranquility. It was not extravagant. It was orderly and warm, reflecting Lillian's steadying influence on Walt's often chaotic creative energy. It was a room designed for recovery, not for show. Down the hall were the bedrooms for their daughters, Diane and Sharon. Walt was adamant that his children should not grow up feeling like exhibits in a museum. Their rooms were designed to be playful, safe, and filled with natural light. They looked out over the gardens and the hills, reinforcing a sense of freedom. One of the most charming features of the upper level was the sleeping porch. Common in the era before air conditioning, this semi-outdoor space allowed the family to sleep while breathing in the cool night air of the hills. It was a connection to nature that technology could not replicate, a reminder that comfort often comes from simplicity. There was also the family room, a vaulted space where the Disneys gathered at the end of the day. Here, away from the pressures of the studio and the demands of fame, Walt was just a father. These quiet evenings were essential. They reminded him exactly who he was working so hard for. Section 6. The Incubator of Genius. It is impossible to separate this house from the work that was produced while Walt lived here. This mansion was the incubator for the golden age of animation. While living within these walls, Walt Disney oversaw the creation of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Pinocchio, Fantasia, Dumbo, and Bambi. These weren't just movies, they were cultural shifts. A key room in this creative process was Walt's private projection room. It wasn't a plush cinema with velvet seats designed for premieres. It was a working theater. Here, Walt would review the dailies, the rough footage from the studio. He would study the movement of characters, critique the story pacing, and analyze the emotional beats. In the quiet of his home, away from the yes-men and the bustle of the office, he could see his work clearly. Outside, in the garden, stood another testament to his philosophy, a small play cottage built exclusively for his daughters. It was scaled to their size, a tiny house where they could play out their own stories. This structure, which still stands on the property today, was physical proof of Walt's respect for the childhood imagination. He believed that the fantasies of children were serious business and deserved their own space to flourish. Section 7. The Landscape and the Departure. The outdoor space was as carefully curated as the interior. Sitting on just over an acre, the gardens were designed to block out the city. Winding pathways, mature trees, and flower beds created a barrier against the outside world. For Walt, nature was a restorative force. Often, when a story knot couldn't be untangled at the studio, a walk through these gardens would provide the solution. However, as the years passed, Walt Disney began to change. By the late 1940s, his ambitions were outgrowing the property. His studio was expanding, but more importantly, he had developed a new obsession: model trains. Walt didn't just want to play with trains, he wanted to ride them. He dreamed of building a miniature railroad, the Carrollwood Pacific, in his own backyard. He envisioned tracks, tunnels, and a trestle. The Storybook Mansion, beautiful as it was, simply didn't have enough flat land to accommodate this mechanical dream. This passion for trains was the seed that would eventually grow into Disneyland. In 1950, the family made the difficult decision to leave Los Feliz. They moved to a larger estate in Holmby Hills, not for status, but for the space to build that railroad. Leaving was emotional. The Storybook Mansion had been the backdrop for their happiest early years, but the future was calling. Section 8. Legacy. A house that remembers. Even after the Disney family departed, the house refused to become just another piece of real estate. It carried a weight, a specific energy that subsequent owners recognized and respected. Over the decades, as Los Angeles modernized and many historic homes were demolished to make way for mega mansions, the Storybook Mansion survived. Owners, including filmmakers like Timur Bekmambetov, understood that they were merely stewards of history. Renovations were made to update plumbing or electricity, but the soul of the house, the hand-carved wood, the stained glass, the whimsical turrets, was preserved with reverence. Today, the house stands as a quiet landmark. It is not a museum with ticket lines. It remains a private home, still lived in, still breathing. And that is perhaps the most fitting tribute of all. Section 9. Conclusion. The shelter of dreams. When we look back at the story of this mansion, we realize it is more than just a biography of a building. It represents a pivotal moment in the history of entertainment. This house sheltered Walt Disney during the fragile years when his dreams were bold but unproven. It offered him a fortress of solitude where he could face the risks of his career without fear. The Storybook Mansion reminds us that great ideas do not happen in chaos. They require a space to grow. They need a home that offers warmth, stability, and a touch of magic. Long before the world believed in Walt Disney, he believed in his stories, sitting by a fire in a house that looked like a fairy tale. The house didn't create the genius, but it protected the dreamer. And for that, it remains one of the most important, yet untold characters in the Disney story.